Welcome to the monthly membership meeting of Physicians for National Health Program, Washington. And I'm Sherry Weinberg. I'm the president of our chapter.
We acknowledge that the city of Seattle and its green spaces are on stolen Coast Salish land, specifically the ancestral land of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Stillaguamish, and Muckleshoot people. Seattle's green spaces by the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. The disruption of this work by colonization and now endeavor to continue this work. We make this acknowledgement to remind ourselves that by being here today, we strive to remedy this injustice through our beliefs and actions in helping to steward our green spaces and communities in Seattle.
So first, I just want to flash up here the agenda for tonight. It's pretty packed because a whole lot went on. It's impossible to cover anything and everything in detail that went on in Boston. But I just like to just show you the lay of the land, what we're going to be talking about, hopefully. So we'll have the attendees. Well, first of all, I'll just mention something about the keynote addresses and the overall look of what happened there. There were four of us there, and we each were in different workshops. So the workshops are down here, and we'll talk about those, that you can see what they are. And John and Scotty were there Friday for the SNaHP Summit and Leadership Training, and they'll be talking about that, as well as the workshops they attended. Then I'll talk about the board meeting on Sunday morning and what the discussion was there. And there's a lot to talk about there that I'm sure we'll all be interested in. Unfortunately, all the videos and resource materials were not made available until about 10 minutes on the PNHP national website until about 10 minutes before this, because I wanted to put a few of those links up there. But when I get out the meeting report in a day or two, I'll have all those links. But there's a couple of things here I could show you. Well, first I'll just show here's the staff, PNHP national staff. And so can you see this?
Yes.
This is, so here's Caitlin Gilbert that we've had a lot of interaction with. I think Robbie has too, that unfortunately will be leaving. She's a national organizer, and Lori Clark will be a new national organizer. Matt Petty's been around since the earliest days. He's the executive director, I guess. Dixon Galvarez is the communications guy. Ken Snyder is the executive director, and Matt has some other title. I can't remember what it was, but Ken is the main leadership guy, and I think he's done an amazing job in the year he's been there and shaping up the national office, which had been having some difficulties. There's a couple of disreputable characters that were wandering around there.
Now I recognize you both.
Who gave you this?
First of all, there were about 300 attendees, and that's counting about 100 SNaHP medical students that were there. The keynote address, the first one was by Donald Cohen, who wrote the book, The Privatization of Everything, and he headlined our May meeting. So we have a video of him talking to us at our May monthly meeting. So he talked about how privatization prevents solidarity amongst those receiving services. The public goods bring people together, but privatization drives people apart. And his book and in his talk, he gave many examples, just about everything you can think of. Privatization has driven people apart, such as schools, public schools and private schools and charter schools, roads. A lot of the roads, particularly along the sidelines, have been sold to private. The sidelines have been sold to private companies, and there's been contracts out there so that the cities who gave them parking rights along the street can't get those back without big court battles. Healthcare, we know about how privatization of healthcare is our main mission, to fight against that. Transportation systems, and we're not just talking about Seattle. Seattle is one of the best places as far as avoiding privatization in the transit system, but some cities have, the whole transportation city, like our metro, is privatized. Hoping that resources that PNHP has, that the password to the 2 keynote speeches, because they asked me to do the video of it. I know those are going to be videos that we can watch in our leisure. I'll give you the links to those. The second one was really an amazing, wonderful keynote address by Linda Villarosa, Hidden Toll of Racism on American Lives. She talked about the myths and memes underlying racism that Black people live with every day, including, she listed some statistics about medical students who actually think that Black people's skin is thicker than white people's skin, so they don't have all the pain that white people do when their skin is scratched and that sort of thing, which is a total bunch of baloney. But she listed a whole lot of stuff like that.
David, I have some of that data in front of me. Do you want me to kind of highlight some of the the key points? So I can't share it. I just took a picture on my phone really fast during the conference, but it is really interesting, some of the false beliefs. So she listed off a whole laundry list of false beliefs and relative percentages of either general practitioners, first, second, third year medical students, as well as medical residents under training. And I believe this study can somebody remind me, it was maybe like 2016, 2013, one of those years. So pretty recently, and to highlight some of the data. So amongst general practitioners, 58% of them believe that Black skin is thicker than whites. And in that same study, 40% of first-year medical students believed that as well. And it decreases as you go through medical school down to 25% of residents, but still a large proportion. One of the other ones that kind of stuck out to me, and I think some of these are a little bit more subtle. For example, Black people's blood coagulates more quickly than whites. 39% of general practitioners believe that, and 29% of first-year medical students believe that as well. Let's see, whites have a more efficient respiratory system than Blacks. It's fully 16% of those surveyed who are general practitioners believed that, and then only 8%, going down to 4% from first-year medical school to residency, believe the same. Blacks' nerve endings are less sensitive than whites. 20% of general practitioners believe the same, and 8% of first-year medical students believe that as well. So I think there's interesting trends to kind of pick apart there, but I think some of them are very telling about, and obviously this is just the tip of the iceberg of maybe some other falsehoods that medical students and physicians might believe in that could still be perpetuated even up until this day. So it's just really elegant. It's just a really elegant study to highlight some of the the false beliefs.
And she has a book out there that is just out that everybody who contributed a certain amount got. So it's definitely worth reading. And she introduced, at least to me, the concept of weathering. Have people heard about what that is? Weathering. Black people throughout their lives are affected by all these things that affect their bodies and their anxiety and stress and all this other stuff. So it weathers their whole experience and reduces their lifespan and all the other lousy statistics we know for people of color. So I think that's a topic for a future PNHP monthly meeting, is the concept of weathering. Has anybody else heard of that? Raise your hand if you have.
I haven't heard of it as that term. What I have heard without a term is that people are affected by their life experiences. and it colors your outlook as you go through life, is affected by your experience so far. And we tend not to take that into account about other people. We just sort of assume they all look, that when they look out from themselves, they see the same things that we do.
Rupa Myra's book called Inflamed is a major tome that sums up that enormous impact on people, indigenous people and people of color and poor people.
Yeah, definitely that Inflamed book. Everybody ought to know about it and read it. It goes through every system in your body and, circulatory, lungs, endocrine, 10 different systems, and shows how external forces are inflaming those systems within your body. Take the circulation system in your body, and it's compared to rivers and how capitalism and everything else has screwed up the rivers and the indigenous people by interrupting the salmon's run. And the salmon were so important in keeping a healthy river and the health of the indigenous people that lived along those rivers. So that corresponds to your circulation system that's got kind of finger things reaching out that are affected by what's going through your circulation system. Anyway, definitely get that book and the one that we were just talking about, Linda Villarosa's.
I'll drop links to them in the meeting chat if people would like to look them up.
Okay, so
there's been some talk about trauma-informed care may relate to some of what you're talking about trauma.
Okay, so I'll put out these keynote lectures. I think we'll be able to watch them on our YouTube channel in the next few days. So now we'll move on to attendees who were there to talk about their particular meetings and workshops they were in. So we can spend the first time on what happened on Friday on SNaHP.
So yeah, I attended the SNaHP Summit, which was on the Friday before the meeting, and we had a great opening discussion from Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, who's now based in, I believe, Maryland as a pediatrician. And he was formerly known as Dr. America. He had a Dr. America podcast that talked a lot about Medicare for all and healthcare access issues. I don't think he's been publishing on that podcast recently. I talked with him briefly and told him he should start his own TikTok, but I think he was a little bit hesitant about that. But, there were other sessions that we attended. So one of the first small group discussions that I attended was specifically around looking at potential actions that we can take this next year in support of Medicare for all. So one of the big advocacy pushes last year was specifically around facilitating support from the American Medical Association to publicly endorse Medicare for all. As some of you may remember, last year, the AMA was foundational in starting the Partnership for a Better Health Future or something along those lines. And this was a grouping of health insurance agencies that, really just came out and put a lot of messaging and funding forward for, anti-socialist programs and pro privatization of public fundings, in particular around Medicare Advantage. And so last year, a consortium of medical students from across the US, mainly focused around the Midwest in the Chicago area, they held an action against the American Medical Association at their annual meeting. And they interrupted one of the plenary talks and were calling out some of the leaders and were really just pushing them in a public venue and interrupted their meeting. And along with some other advocacy pushes, they actually got the American Medical Association to leave the partnership that they had started with all these private health organizations. And so it was really powerful, and that was facilitated by students with SNaHP, medical students. And so that was really impactful. And we kind of wanted to discuss and keep that momentum going and talk about the upcoming AMA meeting this coming June, to see if we can get the AMA to fully support Medicare for all in a public statement. And we discussed some ideas around direct action at the annual meeting, whether to be disruptive or to be pushing the AMA in a positive light to support Medicare for all, because I believe last year they held a vote to actually come out in support of Medicare for all as part of the AMA, and they were, I think, just a handful of votes shy. And so this year we really want to keep the momentum up and just get those last few votes so that the AMA can come out in support of single-payer Medicare for all system. So we came up with some ideas, and we made some, we got some contact information from some of the other medical students that were in attendance, and some of the planning is hopefully going to be ongoing until June.
For those small group sessions, I attended the research team group, and our job is we're just kind of, you gotta know about your enemies in order to work with them or work against them. And so the goal is to learn as much about the AMA as we could. And just kind of some fun facts we learned that are kind of surprising to me. The AMA used to represent about 90% of physicians. Now only 20% of physicians in the United States are members, and that's kind of wishy-washy. There's no like actual place that gives the number. You can find it some places that say like 17, other places say up to 29%. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Other interesting facts about the AMA is they're one of the biggest lobbying groups in the nation. And they, since membership has been going down for the past couple of years, tens of years, a large portion of their revenue is actually from selling physician data to pharmaceutical companies, which I thought was very interesting. Other interesting facts about it, it's a largely white organization, though the average age does skew around 40 years old. The leadership tends to be older and from the higher paid specialties, which I thought was interesting. A couple other facts. They have kind of put out phrases and kind of spoken to the idea that they think that healthcare access and medicine is a universal right, but with that, it never goes to mention, currently does not mention single payer. It mentions tax cuts and working with insurance companies. And so, you know, kind of all the same old stuff, neolib, pro-capitalist talking points throughout, but there has been movement in the past, especially from students that have pressured them to try and become more representative of younger physicians and physicians that want to help all Americans. And so our goal is to kind of continue pulling out this research information, learn as much about the AMA as we can, and then we also figured out how to put a resolution up to be voted on. And so we're becoming members of the AMA and then put a resolution forth for supporting a single payer healthcare system, and then along with direct action and other groups protest at their meeting in June, I think it is. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions if you have any questions.
So then there was the leadership training with text banking, small group discussions, telling your story, and building a culture of asking people to join. You guys went to those sessions? That was the other half of the Friday student session.
Yeah, so the text banking was, I mean, it's kind of fun. They gave us lunch, and as we were eating over lunch, we had these scripts that we could just type out and just blast out to either new PNHP members or all PNHP members that we haven't touched base with in a long time. So I sent a couple texts to some physicians, medical students, and residents, and just let them know that, hey, if there's any questions you have about PNHP or organization, or would like to be better connected, please feel free to reach out. And I had a few responses, direct texts while we were doing this phone banking, and connected with some physicians and residents with local PNHP chapters. And so just from my perspective, it was impactful on for a handful of the people that I texted. Scotty, I don't know if you I think you said you got 1 or 2 responses.
I didn't get any responses, sadly. I emailed 4 people, and I guess I could text them again, but
no, I wouldn't text them again. Don't put that on yourself. Yeah, so I texted, I think, approximately 8 people, and I got 2 to 3 responses. So yeah, I'm sure other people saw it and they appreciated it, but it was a fun little action that we held together, and could possibly be integrated into some of our future actions as well if we wanted to do a text banking or something like that. And then I guess the other thing that happened, we had other small group discussions that Scotty and I attended. One of them, I think Scotty, you attended this as well, was Telling Your Story, and that was with Lori Clark. She's one of the national organizers at PNHP, and she's specifically going to be working directly with medical students across the entire US. And it's a really great little breakout session, and just essentially it's kind of piggybacking off of the idea of an elevator speech, where you just give a 2-minute like introduction to yourself and your values and why you want others to join your movement or like with the work that you do. And this breakout session was really interesting in that it kind of turned the focus away from, you know, the direct advocacy organization that you're a part of, and more focused on the values that you have as an individual, and kind of telling your own personal story in a way that hopefully reflects the values of the individual that you're talking to. And, you know, in building that rapport, building that relationship, it will be that it'll be that much easier to bring somebody into the movement that you're a part of, the advocacy that you're a part of, because it's kind of like a natural step from, you know, we all have this shared value in social justice that everybody should have a right to healthcare, et cetera. And so I'm part of this organization called PNHP, or I'm part of this organization called Students for a National Health Program. And we're having this event coming up XYZ, and you fill in the blanks, and you kind of get an idea of how powerful it can be.
Moving on, there was a regional meeting, like the PNHP Western Regional Meeting that John, Scotty, and Hugh attended. I'm not quite sure what happened there. I didn't hear about what was that meeting like, what went on?
Well, it wasn't what you thought it was going to be. So I do know that there was a little bit of drama in PNHP Washington and the national chapter, but none of that was brought up. It was actually like very great. It was just, it was very warm reception. We had medical students, a lot of medical students from California. Philip Verhoff, who's going to be the new PNHP president, coming in. He is now based out at Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Hawaii, and so he helped to facilitate that meeting as well. And we kind of just went around and gave like regional updates. I talked a little bit about UW's Single Payer 101 event, as well as the ad that we took out with Sarah about Medicare Advantage, and kept it at that, and just heard other people's stories, other chapters' actions.
Was there any talk about a left coast PNHP, the states working together on some common project? Because that would be a good one for the anti-ACO reach thing that Passara is spearheading.
Nothing that I heard directly. I don't know, David Lauda, I don't know if you want to speak more to that, if you've been in communication with other PNHP chapters or other organizations in the West Coast. We talked a little bit about medical students coming together and just sharing some of our common events, but nothing specifically around ACO reach.
I've had, I don't know of any of those contacts. I don't know if Robbie or David McClanahan can comment, but that's an important question. I don't have an answer at all.
I did talk to, there's a guy in Portland, Oregon, and also Mike Huntington. I talked to him about it. You know, Mike Huntington's the OPS and PNHP guy in Corvallis. And there was somebody from California there. Also thought it would be interesting to explore that a little bit in the future. Washington has a problem since we don't have a state income tax.
No, I just wanted to let you know that we had a contact from California PNHP. Now, I don't know, who is the leader of the California? Is there a leader of the California PNHP?
There's a president, I think it's Hank Abrams, isn't it, Bill?
No. His name is David Leibowitz.
Okay, well then it was not a man, it was a woman, and Anna Malinow was the one that put her in touch with us.
Right.
In the hopes that we're moving in the direction of developing some kind of national efforts to terminate ACO reach and and go after Medicare Advantage. And we're working on a response to her. I was just looking for her name, so I'm going to go back and look at my emails, get her name, and then I'll put it in the chat. And maybe some of you will know her.
Okay, so we got a lot to cover, so we'll move on to the workshops. And we each went to 2 workshops, so we might be able to talk about 8 of them if we can participate. I'll talk about the ones I went to. The first one was opportunities for federal action, and Rachel Madley, Pramila's Jayapal's healthcare policy person was there, as well as Alex Lawson from Social Security Works, and that was a really fun session. If you know Alex Lawson, he peppers a bunch of swear words here and there, but to keep things lively and people laughing. So anyway, they didn't think there was much chance to do anything in single payer in the upcoming Congress. Of course, we hadn't had hadn't known that the blue wave wasn't going to happen, but that was, the meeting was before the election. They thought there was some opportunity for executive actions by Biden, and I think he did some of that on drug prices. And there's some other things that, single payer people might push him towards, although he's said in the past he's not in favor of Medicare for all. The other thing was there's a letter that insurance company put out that praises Medicare Advantage, and every year they go around to all the House offices and ask the representatives to sign on to it. And it says basically, we write to express our strong bipartisan support for the Medicare Advantage program and the high quality care it provides. And the letter from 2022, the last one, was signed by 340 of the 435 members of the House of Representatives, including all Washington representatives except for Pramila and Adam Smith. And interestingly, several of the signers on there are also a member of the Progressive Caucus that supposedly are against privatization of Medicare, but they signed on to this letter. So there's an opportunity. This letter is probably going to be going around again, I don't know, January, February, so we can push on our representatives in Washington State anyway, not to sign on to the letter this year. So I think Alex Lawson's probably closest to that than anybody else. So through Social Security Works and our meetings with him every month, and individual chats with him, he can probably lead us in that direction about when we can start pressing on our representatives not to sign it. I don't think the letter has actually been written yet, but it's part of the strategy of the insurance companies to get this sign-on letter out there.
Are they signing on to it out of ignorance or because they're bought by lobbyists? Or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both.
Yesterday in Newsweek, there was a big article by Representative Jan Schakowsky and Wendell Potter entitled "How Medicare Advantage Scams Seniors." So, and then there was, other material we can draw on, but there's more and more mounting public evidence that that we can make use of.
Okay, the second, another one of the second workshop I went to was Medicare Advantage, what single payer advocates next need to know. And this was given by Ed Weisbart, who updated his slide set. And I think we know Ed Weisbart because I think we had him for a monthly meeting in the last few months. But anyway, he's big in OPS, and I think he loves to give presentations. Let me see if I can call it. He has a new slideshow, and he gave me access to that. Let me see if I can pull it up here. I'm going to just click through these really quickly. Anyway, so I can get this to you guys anyway. It contrasts Medicare Advantage and traditional Medicare. This is stuff that we need to know, and we can use his slides. Anyway, you kind of get an idea. There's about I don't know, 40, 45 slides or something like that. I have it on my Dropbox now, and I got to figure out how to make that Dropbox link available to anybody who wants it without adding their individual email addresses. Okay, but that's going to be a good resource for all of us when we're giving presentations, as well as helping us clear our mind about, what we need to focus on when we're fighting privatization.
Dave, do you know if it's going to put that up on the national website?
As I said before you signed on, I just got a message from Susan Rogers saying that this resources would be available, and you had a password. But if that was given to, the password is given to everybody who was in Boston, but you can make those available to you by giving $10.
I got that email. I'll go back and look at that. Thank you.
But that's, I'm sure Ed's slides will be on there. And I think we've seen some of his previous slideshows. And actually, when we started tonight, I forgot to mention that Adam Gaffney presented the new updated PNHP slide set that Himmelstein and Jeff Woolhandler gave to start off every annual meeting before the pandemic. And so there's an updated slide set that's got, well, Himmelhandler slides were like 150 slides, but they were kind of grouped so you could pick out and, take 10 or 12 slides to help you with a talk that you're giving that focuses on something or other.
This is Hugh. I would highly recommend going through Gaffney's slide set. It was phenomenal, and it's just full of great data and visuals. And I didn't, again, all of this stuff is just now getting put up on the national website. So hopefully that should be available too, but it was tremendous.
Okay, Hugh, you want to talk about the workshops you went to?
Yeah, I went to a couple of them. I went to Wendell Potter's How to Win with the Business Community, mostly because the guy's famous, and I just wanted to see what he had to say. It was mostly just a personal reflection of how he came around and converted from, he was a sort of a publicist for Cigna Health insurance company, and how he just realized that he was just being made to spew propaganda and not tell the truth. And he just couldn't take it anymore. And that's why he resigned. He tried to stay in the organization for a while, and he just finally found it impossible. And his slide deck's not that helpful. I mean, his analogy was, you had to drink the Kool-Aid and believe the lies that they propose. One of their biggest lies was they keep talking about consumer-driven health plans, which essentially is high deductible health plans. And that's what they were pushing. And he identified in the business community 4 main players that were instrumental in these high deductible plans. And that was the Business Roundtable, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and a lot of state and local chambers of commerce as well, and then the National Federation of Independent Business. And that these organizational entities were ones that fought tooth and nail against any meaningful healthcare reform. And they were just basically capitalizing on the rising disdain of people with government and globally across all of them. So that's about all I got out of that. It was interesting to hear him talk. He speaks very well, but there wasn't a whole lot of substance to it. He did then spend about a third of the time taking question and answer. The other one I went to was reproductive rights in the post-Roe era, because I stood up and spoke at our regional meeting to just call people's attention to how the drastic difference in our states, particularly Wyoming and Idaho, is putting our medical school for our region in really a difficult position in terms of training of students and residents. And after that session, I was looking for a vial of hemlock. I was so depressed. You could cut the anger in that room with a butter knife. It was run by a reproductive endocrinologist, Darjeet, and then another OBGYN woman from Indiana. And they just described these phenomenal vignettes of people going across state lines to get an abortion, and what a huge impact it had on the patients, the delivery of medicine, and also their practices. This one woman was working in Ohio and in across the border. I wasn't Indiana, it must have been in Michigan, but she would drive back and forth and to provide reproductive care and particularly abortions to these people. And I mean, even to the point where, you know, they felt physically threatened at times. And the action plan that came out of that wasn't that clear to me, but just the stories that they told were phenomenal. And it was very concerning and depressing.
I can actually talk next if you're done, Hugh.
Sure.
Because I went to the same sessions that he went to, I think in a different order. I went to the business session. I actually hadn't heard of Wendell Potter before, but primarily because in Wyoming, a couple students here were advocating for Medicaid expansion, because now we are the only state in the West who has not passed Medicaid expansion. And so I was thought that could be applicable to our fight here as well. And the kind of biggest thing that came out for me, even for supporting single payer or any government run healthcare system, is that for small businesses, they are at a pretty strong competitive disadvantage against corporations that are required to provide benefits, while your mom and pop shop on the corner is not going to have insurance for their workers. And so that was my biggest takeaway from the event, is just another kind of bow in my quiver about how to talk about this and how to advocate for this for small local shops, because it's really just another expense that they cannot put forward. And then kind of on a similar tone to that, you even have these bigger corporations now, especially in California, with Uber and a handful of the gig work jobs that are trying to get rid of healthcare access. They're trying to make all their employees gig workers, so they don't have to cover retirement, they don't have to cover insurance. And so just further points about how healthcare coverage is just really, you're just on a knife's edge all the time. And we need to be able to feel comfortable reaching out to members of the business community and being like, hey, this is something you can support. The Chamber of Commerce, the national board, does not support a single payer healthcare system, but I could see slow grassroots movements pushing local chamber organizations to actually look into this and see the cost benefit of it. So that's my big takeaway from the building business support for single payer. And then as well for the reproductive rights in post-Roe era, I'm not going to talk about it too much because I think you did a great job. But my interest was being in Wyoming. Our trigger law is currently in the courts banning abortion. And so just kind of seeing what this means for the future. My biggest takeaway from this was how, as we're fighting for a single payer system, how do we pull people into our tent? And something that people aren't really generally comfortable talking about is reproductive rights, because they're worried, okay, if the administration changes and we have a national healthcare system, I will read the book. If we have this public national healthcare system and you get the conservatives in power, they're just going to make abortion illegal every other year. And so they kind of talked about the specifics of the bill and how it currently has the wording that would include reproductive justice, which includes abortions, but then also fertility treatment as well. They didn't get to the specifics of that, but mentioned that it should be safe between administrations. I don't know the specifics of that as well. But then just talking about like, no, you can go have these conversations about single payer healthcare system with people who work in different states for abortion access and be like, we're on the same team fighting for healthcare justice. And we should all be in the same tent together and working together. I'll go to your event to help support you. Hey, are you at all interested in learning more about the PNHP?
I would just add one other thing to that conversation for everyone. I don't know if you've noticed, but you know, where it used to be Highline Hospital, it's now St. Stephen's. Where it used to be Harrison, it's now St. Michael's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a good friend of mine warned me 15 years ago that the Catholics would control healthcare in this country. And I was stimulated by the conversation about reproductive rights to just pull up an interesting article, and I'll give it to David. And it's a 2020 study about Catholic control of healthcare, and they did a survey of states. Washington State has 17% of our population who espouse to be Catholic, but this is 2020 data before a lot of these mergers happened. In 2020, 41% of the hospitals in Washington State are under Catholic control. And a lot of them also have directives. I forget what the somewhat moralistic acronym is, basically where the Council of Bishops dictate what can and cannot be done in these hospitals. And, you know, just like Virginia Mason got swallowed up by the Franciscans, now Sisters of Providence have swallowed up Swedish, and which, you know, was covertly done about 6 years ago, and now it's overt. But it is a growing trend nationally where now 1 out of 6 hospital beds in this country are controlled by Catholic healthcare organizations, which makes, even despite state by state law, impacts women's ability to access reproductive care. And I'll give David that article, and he can put it on a copy of it on our website.
So John, any thing to say about the workshops you went to?
Excuse me, David.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing in relationship to what Hugh was saying, please? You know, this strikes me as very, very similar to the whole issue of dealing with racism. When Medicare was passed, you know, Johnson forced all of these racist hospitals, if they were going to get Medicare money, to have to be egalitarian. And I think it's the same thing with the legislation that is pending in the Congress, that it's the identical situation, that federal law could potentially abort that Catholic preemption if they're going to receive public federal dollars. You know, the argument's the same. I mean, the issue is always about money.
Right.
Money and power.
And they still get federal money. They get a significant proportion of federal money. And in fact, the data shows that they do less charity care than most non-religious hospital organizations.
Sure, sure.
In many of these, September 25th, top of the fold in the New York Times was the article calling out the Sisters of Providence on the deal.
The question is, what's going to happen with the legislative language if the Democrats drive a universal eligibility for reproductive health care, a national bill? You know, the anti, what's his name, the Tennessee Senator Graham, anti-Graham bill. I mean, the politics are very similar, I think, to the issue of excluding people of color.
Right.
The way it was before Medicare. It's just something we need to watch for, and language is crucial everywhere.
No, thank you for sharing that. That's actually really insightful. I think you know, I think there is a lot of legislation that's written right now on single payer healthcare with some of these bills, but you know, as we all know, they have a whole host of committees and subcommittees to go through and edits and things like that. So the final bills are going to look very different from what we see right now. But you know, as this movement builds and we bring more people into these conversations, like I think, bringing that up as consistently and often as we can is going to be crucial to make sure that the language reflects what we discuss here and some of our values as well. I did also want to point out that Hugh, the article that you, or the paper that you referenced, Dr. Wong shared that in the chat just now about the growth of Catholic health systems. So if people want to access that, it's in the chat.
Right, great. Yeah, I was just going to pull it. That's exactly the reference. It's long, but it's full of very clear data and well presented with good graphics in it too. Again, that study was published in 2020, and the further encroachment on what they're doing is going around buying up community hospitals that are broke. A lot of these, of course, are not, quote, non-cash transactions or whatever kind of mergers they do.
A little bit of a departure from Medicare for All, but still very relevant. Lessons from COVID-19 in caring for the underserved. And that was facilitated by a brilliant neurologist, Dr. Nikde Mejia, as well as former PNHP president, Claudia Fagan, who sits on the national board now, I believe. And it was just really insightful because it was just a very grounding discussion about, some of the lessons that we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, especially from Dr. Fagan working in Cook County Hospital in Chicago, and things that we can use from that to build and prepare for the next pandemic when it happens. So some things that were specifically highlighted was the implementation and growth of telemed services. There was a lot of hiccups around that in the early phases of the COVID-19 pandemic, but they found overall that it's actually a plus now because it just increases access. Patients don't have to travel from across the city to go to see the physician that they want, as long as they're in the same state. It's not a problem. Another thing that they brought up was during the early parts of the pandemic was the difficulties around language and recommendations coming directly from the Centers for Disease Control. And as some of you all may remember, in the very early days of the pandemic, the language and the recommendations were changing, bit by bit in the early days. And, at first started, we weren't really sure what was going on. We thought it was aerosolized. We thought it was through, COVID-19 was spread through contact. And, you can wear a surgical mask or you can wear a cloth mask, and those recommendations were changing. And I think that actually, and they brought up the point that actually sowed a lot of distrust with the medical establishment because there was no clear answers, and it's difficult because we didn't really have those answers at the same time. And so they just wanted to point out that messaging is very critical in some of these scenarios. One other thing that we brought up was that was a repeated theme throughout this is the role that social determinants play in a patient's actual outcome, less so than the actual interventions that were utilized by healthcare providers. So one thing that we discussed and I brought up was a study around Native American and indigenous peoples here in the United States and how they actually had the highest uptake in vaccines. But even with any sort of infection, because of social determinants or lack of access to proper nutrition or healthcare services, any infection amongst indigenous peoples, despite the high vaccination rates, led to the poorest outcomes of any demographic in the United States. And so we brought that up, and that kind of stimulated a lot of really interesting conversations around how, in preparing for the next pandemic, yes, we could talk about preparedness and making sure we have supplies and increasing vaccine technologies so that we can roll out vaccines quickly and broadly, but also really taking a step back and looking at some of these other social determinants that can really play a huge role in a patient's outcome. Yeah, and the unionization, that was facilitated by Dr. Andy Hyatt. He's a former SNaHP leader, and then he moved on to PNHP, and he just started practicing. And then it was also facilitated by Taylor Walker. And yeah, they just, Andy gave a really beautiful discussion and breakdown of CIR, which is the, somebody help me here. I think it's not center, but something for interns and residents. It's a national union.
So Committee of Interns and Residents, I think.
Committee of Interns and Residents, thank you. And so we just gave a really interesting discussion about how a lot of the more recent unions have arose out of essentially broad social movements amongst residents and physicians. he did highlight the unionization of Montefiore Health System in New York and some of the work that he was doing with them there, and how they really, in a sort of pragmatic way, like started from the very bottom in like having one-on-one conversations with colleagues and other people in the health system, and not going to administration until you actually have a broad consensus amongst interns, residents, and physicians that a union is actually warranted. And so it was kind of it was very fun discussion, and he gave some like great sort of I would say almost guerrilla tactics about organizing and forming a union in the healthcare systems, especially amongst residents and physicians. And we're seeing some of that play out now with some of the protests in California. And he did update us as well that CIR is currently in discussions with the resident fellow and physician union in the University of Washington system about possibly bringing them into CIR so that they can have more national resources and better access to funding and lawyers and everything. So yeah, that's my update on those two.
This board meeting was Sunday morning. It lasted for, I think, 3 hours. It was really a fabulous meeting. It was chaired by Ken, who was the executive director. And so first people went around introducing themselves and where they were from and so on. And it was noted that next year is going to be the 35th anniversary of PNHP. So the first thing that was started was things board members are proud of. Went around the circle. The work of the staff of PNHP, they're proud of that. The development of board over the past 2 years. It's much more expansive and, you know, equitable board now. Before this year, there were 4 students who were on the board, but they only had 1 vote between them. So now there's 4 students on the board and they each have a vote. So there's really a expanded role and influence of students on the PNHP board now. The organization has grown some. Everybody's proud of PNHP New York Metro's work, and they put on a monthly meeting that's really good. And I hope you're all on their email blast list so you can tune in when you like. People are proud of the growth of SNaHP. And again, over 100 students showed up this year. Happy with the attendance in in-person meetings. We haven't had an in-person meeting since the pandemic, and I really did like the in-person meetings, although it was kind of a hassle for transportation. But Swedish Providence gave us a room free of charge for our meetings. So I don't know if we want to talk about going back to that kind of meeting, which would, and we could Zoom it for people like Scotty who are, you know, not in the immediate area. Fundraising strength, people were pretty happy with how the fundraising's been going. Openness and willingness to discuss reproductive justice, new renewed connections between PNHP and SNaHP members. SNaHP members' experience at the conference. Some of the SNaHP board members were talking about how they really liked this meeting in Boston. And there was more representation from PNH people in the South than in previous national meetings. People were very happy with the fight against Medicare Advantage, which was a priority for PNHP beginning this year to focus on stopping the direct contracting and ACO, Medicare Advantage and ACO reach. SNaHP to PNHP members pipeline and energy and organizing coming out of SNaHP Summit. There's been an effort to organize pediatricians, and I think there's like a members interest group meeting at this in Boston of pediatricians. People were happy about the enthusiasm and activity of the members, and proud of the work that all the staff and organizations and felt that PNHP is being left in good hands. Now, here was one of the most interesting hours or so that was talked about by Ken Snyder. So he posed this question. So PNHP will be 35 years old next year. We pioneered the idea of single-payer healthcare. We are the largest organization that is dedicated to Medicare for all. There's a meeting every month. No, he mentioned there's a meeting every month of Medicare for all organizations, but who is it led by? It's not led by PNHP, it's led by National Nurses United. And why is that? You know, everybody here knows National Nurses United, big nurses organization across the country, very progressive. So why is that Medicare for All monthly meeting led by NNU instead of PNHP? Well, first of all, they are well organized. They have resources, office space, staff, and money. They're building coalitions. They've been doing that for several years. They have thousands of committed members, and they play well with others. So basically, here's a word that he kept coming back to. One word describes why NNU runs the Medicare for All table: because they have power. So the question is, how can PNHP get the power that NMU does? So the power of physicians, the power that we have is manifested in two ways. One is authority. So we make decisions and are respected and listened to about those decisions. The other is organized ideas. We never talk about the fact that we've won the battle of ideas in the progressive sphere because of all the research that we've done over the past, 15 years that lots of other organizations and legislative people rely on. So we're well known as doing the best research and what's wrong with our healthcare system and what would be the best way to replace it. So again, our brand has been built on having the best data and ideas, but we are seeing the limitations of that because we know that 2/3 of the country seems to indicate they want Medicare for all, but a majority of those who want it think that they're going to keep their health insurance that they have now. So there's a whole lot of educating to do out there, an opportunity to do that. So to actually win, what we need is organized money and organized people. Now, this question of money, irked some people because we know we're never going to have as much money as our opposition and insurance companies are going to have. So in this organization, we never say what we really need is power. And we talk about capacity, talk about increased membership, a nice thing, but we never say what we actually need, the power. And then the question of money comes up. We're not going to win the money battle, but we need a certain amount of money, and we need to win the people battle, and we think we can do that with good organizing. So we need enough money to compete with insurance companies to get our message out there. So, but organized people beat money all the time, right? We've got to prove that again and again. So then they talked about what are examples the board has seen of power at work, and unions can make things happen just by issuing threats, and people take the calls of union leaders when they call. And corporations have a lot of money that they use to make things happen. Black Lives Matter had a ton of organized people, and they had quite a bit of influence. So then Ken asked members what they think it would look like a PNHP was powerful. And we need to pick the right battles. Organizers in every state, organizations would refer to us as allies and have us at the table for advocacy efforts. We need to be better well known among physicians where we work and physicians that we know in our organizations. We need to have a better media presence. All these things are possible. So what would it mean for us to be personally powerful? I mean, legislators would take our calls when we called, and they would meet with us to hear our ideas. And I think PSARA has done a great job of that in the Pacific Northwest by, organizing meetings with our legislators and staff. So that's happening all the time, thanks to the PNHP, the PSARA leadership. And luckily, I get to tag along on a lot of those. So, and legislators would take our calls, and politicians would seek our support, advice. And we've got a pretty decent relationship with Pramila, both PNHP Washington and PSARA. And I don't know if I want to get into the recent dust up about Pramila's letter that pulled back a little bit from calling for the end of ACO reach, but I think people in the Pacific Northwest had a lot to do with her not sending that letter out that, said, well, if we can get rid of the bad actors in Medicare, then the ACO reach takeover of traditional Medicare would fall apart. But anyway, that's something in the future, and we're still organizing for that. But we need to get legislators across the country, everywhere across the country, to hear from their local constituents that they do not want privatization of Medicare and want to get rid of the Medicare Advantage that we already have, but let alone fight against the implementation of ACO reach, which most people don't even know about. It's under the table, which is the way the insurance companies and private equity firms that are controlling this want to keep it that way. So this is the fight that's going to be going on in the spring and into the next year.
David, I didn't understand what you said about Pramila and the letter and the influence of people in the Northwest about not sending that letter. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Well, I didn't understand. I mean, that letter.
Well, there was a letter.
Wasn't sent.
There was a letter that she and.
No, I know about the letter.
But she pulled back from sending that, and it's kind of not even talked about anymore. So it's not going to be out there again. And then about a week later, she got hit with the Ukraine thing. So she, anyway, I think it's thanks mostly to PSARA in this area that prevented that letter from being sent. So I don't know if
we get credit too for that on leadership, though, I think, right?
What?
Our chapter gets some credit for the leadership on that too, though, right? As far as
we didn't actually meet with Pramila, but I think that she knew that we were against it, and we were about to contact her when PSARA met with her and got her to pull back on that, a day before we were going to send her a letter. Anyway, so next steps. So in terms of the campaigns, PNHP is going to send everyone the work that the staff did in March against the direct contracting, but we need to make power the central tenet of that. So the whole board meeting was about how to increase the power of PNHP. So now the next steps are based on the 4 pillars, and this is something that PNHP came up with, I think a couple months ago, to help focus our advocacy. So the 4 pillars of advocacy are growing our legislative advocacy by having a better relationship with our local legislators, particularly Congress people. Strong chapters are needed to push both local and state legislation. Direct more money from PNHP National. Now, PNHP National collects money. Half of all dues in our region are collected by PNHP National, but they set aside half of that money into a fund that we can tap onto. And I think that's somewhere around, what, $34,000 or something? Shares.
Close to that. I think it's about 30,000.
And when Passara put out those ads in the newspaper, that I think full-page ads against ACO REACH and Call Your Congress People, we asked PNHP National to give us, I forget, it was 4,000 or 5,000, and they sent us a check, even though there was a lot of problems within PNHP at the time about how to react to this Pramila letter. And the PNHP policy committee decided to take a neutral stance on that and not say anything, not to get other people to sign on to that letter that was retracted. But not to ask her to retract the letter. So that caused a whole lot of aggravation and within PNHP, but I think that's kind of settled now. But anyway, they allowed us to use that money without, giving us any negative feedback on it.
So we're free in the future if we want to kind of take leadership. Had we wanted to, they didn't say like, "Hey, you can't do that."
Yeah, I think we got all that money out there and we don't use it for much of anything since we stopped having in-person meetings before COVID. So, we got that money and we can do stuff that we want with it. I think we helped support a couple of students going to Boston, and also some refreshments for a meeting that John set up at, I think it was on the UW campus, wasn't it, John? Still here?
Anyway, I, as the treasurer, when I asked them to send us a check, there's not any noticeable conversation about what we're going to do with it. Although usually I give at least a sentence about why we're asking for it. It's sort of earmarked for us, but it's the money earns at least something when they have it in their treasury, whereas our BECU account doesn't earn anything to speak of. So it's better to leave the money in PNHP's account until we have a need for it. So I keep our accounts relatively low and then just ask for money, and they've never questioned me.
But they did know that money was going for the newspaper ad, because I asked them told them about that.
That's right.
So moving on, so about the growing our legislative advocacy, and DCEs could be a way to give chapters something to more concrete to work on with our legislators. We could, I mentioned before, advocating for regional single payer efforts, the left coast, and I think that's something we can look into in the spring, because there are other people on the coast that are interested in exploring that.
Good.
So we will need to engage with the new Congress, and Ed's slides are great at connecting with conservatives or moderate audiences. You know, that's something that's always brought up, that how do you talk to people that could be won over, but are much more conservative than you are and need to, you know, you can't attack them. You have to kind of understand where they're coming from and then bring them over gently. So again, we should push our legislators not to sign on the letter supporting Medicare Advantage. That's going to be coming out probably in January, February. And build on the op-eds that was in the New York Times article that exposed the fraud within Medicare Advantage. That there was a couple, I think, articles there that have gotten widespread notoriety, and people are using it, and seeing maybe for the first time about how much fraud is in private insurance. So that kind of melds into confronting profiteers. Basically, the profiteers are in the privatization, building relationship with organizing the allies we need to win, and they can be different kinds of organizations. At the board meeting, it didn't seem like people had much success in organizing religious organizations, but working with local unions was, successful in many places. Poor People's Campaign, People's Actions, Student National Medical Association, Latin Students Medical Association, and we should be centering racial justice in our work. And again, that keynote speech that we talked about before in that book, I think hopefully I can get that keynote speech online in the next couple of days. That I need to get the slides so I can splice them in there, because the lighting was terrible in there and you could hardly read the slides that were up on the screen, and one point one of the screens didn't even work. So if I can get the slides and splice them in, I can make a pretty reasonable video of her talk. So building net, and I think in the Northwest here, we've done a really great job in working with other progressive organizations. The Healthcare is a Human Right Washington has 42 organizations, and they're basically all committed to healthcare justice. And PASARA has taken the lead in organizing around the state with their local chapters to, get this information out there. And we cooperate pretty closely with them. So then the other one, the fourth pillar, building networks in every medical society. And I can't say that we've done very good work in that, although I think Sherry has tried to get the Washington State Medical Society to, to support single payer. And didn't you get them to say that that was one of the possibilities of, improving healthcare justice in the state?
Yes, we have gotten that far, but I do think that this is important. And I have, as a retired physician, my dues for the WSMA are $0. Now, I'm not sure if you join already retired, whether that would do it, or whether the fact that I joined them way back. But I think the other important thing to say about state medical societies is that they elect AMA delegates who then go to the AMA, that the WSMA does not take national policy positions directly. They instruct their AMA delegation to do certain things. And so writing resolutions, for instance, at the WSMA's annual meeting are in that form when we talk about a national issue like getting rid of DCEs and ACO REACH and the like. And so membership matters. And there is, I know, at least one progressive member on the AMA delegation, and that who I can talk to when I need to. He's not a close friend, but I have met him, and he is. I have his ear when I really have a good message to give. But that's what we need. We do need to do that, and we need our young physicians to join our state medical association. It's not real expensive, whereas the AMA is expensive to join, and you don't have to be a member of the AMA in order to be a member of the WSMA. So I really would encourage it, and we can get our medical association to be a progressive leader nationally if we do that over years. It'll take a while, but it starts with young physicians joining.
Yeah,
I would really encourage that.
I think that's our biggest weakness in our chapter, is we're basically all retired except for 2 or 3. And but I think the SNaHP organizing meetings within the medical schools, with provided snacks or dinner or whatever, is a good way to reach out to younger physicians who are in training, and also practicing physicians. Now, unfortunately, Hugh Foy retired a couple of years ago. He was head of the Seattle Surgical Society, but getting a bunch of surgeons to support single payer, certainly it might be worth a try to say this is one of the avenues towards healthcare justice or so. What do you think, Hugh? Is that conceivable at all?
Well, it's interesting when you collar them individually. A good proportion of them, I can't cite any statistics, are in favor of single payer, even people in leadership positions. But very few are willing to come out publicly for that. The University of Washington, UW Medicine, I don't know what you think, Chris, but they have been very clear that you aren't to mix politics, which they think the single payer movement is clearly politics, with your practice of medicine in their organization.
I mean, we can't support any particular candidate. We can do educational things. I mean, you know all this, but I think there's a lot of fear, right? There's fear that if you take a public position, you're going to get blowback from somebody somewhere. That's what I see from a lot of physician organizations, physicians, and leadership.
You're terrified of being branded as red. And we've been that way for decades. And we've got to overcome that fear, because that's the only way we're going to bring a class-based analysis to this struggle and transform our relationship to the general public. We've got to be ready to talk about socialized medicine. The VA is right there all around us with millions of people involved in it. We never talk about that model. And we never talk about the public health requirement at the head of the medical system. And we use healthcare when we are talking about a medical care system, which is barbarous in our society. We need to send a gigantic delegation to Cuba to really look at and be inspired by what a great public health system is all about. We've got to get over this fear of being red baited. I mean, the elitism in our field is really suffocating. Excuse the outburst.
It's interesting that you should say that, because I'm thinking back to how physicians, when Group Health Cooperative formed in the 1940s, its physicians were not permitted to join the King County Medical Society and the WSMA because they were regarded as pinkos.
Right.
And now look at it, it's now Kaiser Permanente. And it's just another insurance company. So anyway, that's just a historical
it goes back.
construct in this area has been renowned for physicians being labeled pinkos, but I guess it's a different generation.
So David Loud?
Yes, thank you. Actually, Sherry just mentioned something that's about what I was going to ask, and that is, what's the relative value, the utility of docs engaging with the local medical societies, like the King County Medical Society? Where does that fit in a strategy?
Well, if you want to be a delegate to the WSMA's annual meeting, you do it through your county medical association. So I am a member of the King County Medical Society. That's the one that costs me still a little bit of money each year. And that gives me, and I'm also a member of the WSMA, but I can be a delegate and get to vote at the annual meetings of the WSMA because I am a delegate from the King County Medical Society. So it doesn't require a lot of time, meetings or anything, just a few bucks to join. Now maybe some of that is because I've been in it for a lot of years, so they know who I am, and they haven't kicked me out. So.
Oh, Robbie?
Yeah, I have a question, David, and then a comment. My question is, I was on a national call. I think it was, when were we talking to Chuck, David? Was it the first time? It was last week, I think it was.
Yeah.
And we were told that PNHP was resurrecting the plan to attack ACO REACH from the perspective of bad actors, and that was the decision at the national convention. And they weren't going to try and resurrect the letter that we were able to persuade Pramila to pull after she talked to Senator Warren. But we were told that we were told that with regard to the struggle to stop the privatization of traditional Medicare, that PNHP had decided to move forward with the strategy of bad actor. And I'm just wanting to know if that's correct or not from what you saw at the convention, or Hugh or whoever.
No, I think that was what happened before she pulled the letter and she got worked over by us here in the Northwest. But there was absolutely no talk about, well, there was talk about bad actors and using that information in the New York Times article, but not as a way to let ACO REACH go forward. I think definitely no talk about that.
So there was an agreement that we would all together work to try and terminate ACO REACH. Now, we're not anticipating we'll get it done by January 23, but the program's supposed to end in 26. And a part of the strategy we're discussing now is no expansion and ending it in 26, and it goes away. That was what one of the things we're talking about. We're also talking about taking on Medicare Advantage, and I want to hear a little bit about how PNHP intends to take on Medicare Advantage in the upcoming period of time.
Well, you can see Ed Whitespart's slideshow was a big hit there, and that focuses on the difference between traditional and Medicare Advantage. And I think the PNHP national office was a little bit, felt embarrassed about how that whole thing with Pramila's letter and the bad actor strategy went down. And I think they purposely shied away from talking about that and would like to let that disappear into the sunset.
Yeah.
So did you get the sense of how they want to attack Medicare Advantage?
Well, there's a whole lot of information out there about what's wrong with it. And, we got to keep plugging that. And, I'll give Ed Whitespart's new slides to you. unfortunately, it's just the slides. And when he gave the talk to his over his slides, that wasn't recorded as far as I know, unless, I'm going to check again with the PNHP national website to see if he is talking, if they recorded him talking on his slides.
So just a quick comment. I just want to say to all of you that Pizarra is really honored and pleased to be able to work so closely with PNHP Washington. And we look forward to working together with you in the coming years, because we know we're in a years-long battle to stop the privatization of Medicare and to try and do what needs to be done to get rid of Medicare Advantage. We know from our membership that we have a number of members who are in Medicare Advantage and who really like it. So taking it on and saying we have to eliminate it, as opposed to helping people understand that it's actually undermining and destroying Medicare by fleecing the Medicare Trust Fund and forcing the people with the most complex conditions in traditional Medicare, making the traditional Medicare in many cases the high-risk pool. We have to be able to educate about that, and we look forward to working with you all as we develop our strategy for the next year, which we're working on doing at the present time. So thank you for your partnership and for your participation with us. We really appreciate it.
Chris, is your hands up? Is that you didn't take it down?
Yep. Nope, I'm taking it down now. But yeah, so I know this has come up on previous years, like the last time I was at a national meeting, and I'm sure it came up again, but was there any more talk about having a lobbyist and a really active lobbying arm for national PNHP?
I think I heard one brief reference to it, but I don't think the funds are available at this point to do that. They are adding a second national organizer, though.
Got it. Yeah, it's been interesting work with ACP. They have a whole, granted there's like 150,000 members compared to our 20,000, but they have a whole Hill Day where you go to DC and they actually arrange all the meetings with your reps, which is really interesting. And then they have a separate, as you guys probably know, a whole separate lobbying arm and a PAC. So it's just very interesting in terms of the power discussion. Because traditionally PNHP has been very educational, right? We're the thought leaders, the influential leaders, and we influence the other people and the other societies to then go off and do something. But if we want to be more direct, I wasn't sure whether we were going to take that step or not.
Ronnie?
Thanks, David. Just being the eternal optimist, I just have to realize or have realized through your conversation about advocacy and the different pillars, while PNHP is maybe a small organization, just talking about the issues in public settings really brings out a lot more support when you can address even just giving a general statement, when you can get questions from people about their specific issues with Medicare, for instance. We can talk about a single payer system that Medicare is supposed to be, and there is a lot of power in that individual conversations. Talking about it with friends, talking about it in religious organizations, talking about it in different meetings can really make that happen. Testifying or asking a question at a legislative town hall, they may give us 60 seconds to ask the question, but afterwards there's an opportunity to connect with people, and that's where the power is. And there's certainly power in physicians, as Dr. Bronston was commenting, there's power in nurses who don't have the same caste system or relationship with the public, but we as individuals can overcome that. And I think it's so important to keep talking about it and keep addressing those issues, and we'll pull people in.
So Andy, I think I'm not quite sure what you're going to say, but please talk about the important, exciting announcement for our next meeting.
Sounds good. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
So this kind of actually ties into what Robbie asked as far as strategy and our art of war, because I've been having some conversations with David about this. So I actually was able to get in touch with David Kucinich, who is confirmed with us January 18th.
Dennis.
Pardon?
Dennis.
Did I misspeak?
You said
Yeah, you said David. It's Dennis, but go ahead.
Oh, no, I do know that it's Dennis Kucinich. I got my dad hat on, so I'm like on standby to put my kids in the tubs, or I get them out of the tub. So anyway, no, I'm well aware it's Dennis, and he's very excited. He has a lot of respect for PNHP, and basically in reaching out to him, he's a warrior who was one of the architects on HR 676, the one of the original bills for expanding to create Medicare for all, as well as he fought for, I think initially single payer in those Obamacare days, but also,
yeah.
Sorry, my phone just cut out.
So tell him what we're asking him to talk about.
Okay, so I don't know why my reception just did that. Yeah, so anyway, the three things that he will give us some guidance on, and again, this kind of ties into Robbie's question about strategy and how we proceed, is three things, like how do we best stop this encroachment of privatization? How do we stop the ACO REACH program ASAP? And then how do we build, second question is like, how do we build our legislative allies in Congress? How do we best go about that? And then the third thing is, since he's seen maybe what doesn't work, he was a hard fighter in the aughts. And before my phone cut out, like I said, he was tip of the spear for trying to get the public option in Obamacare. And Obama actually told him to his face on Air Force One, like, no, we're not going to do it. But I feel it'll be very insightful hearing what his thoughts are on like the best way for success. And so, and ultimately, the third thing I'm going to ask him is just like, or I've asked him, is like how he thinks best to proceed on single payer to actually win this fight. So we'll see what he's been very receptive and very respectful about how much he loves PNHP. So I think that'll be really cool. And so look forward to the emails from David here in the next month on some of the details. It's gonna be a cool. It'll definitely be a cool meeting. And by the way, I wanted to mention from Donald's, when Donald was here in May about the privatization of everything, one of the best quotes he had, I thought, was he said the problem with the privatization treats citizens as consumers. That was something that always like stayed with me, because I think I was actually the one that had booked Donald, and I found him to be really key on to win this fight ideologically. If you haven't read his book, it's really good. But yeah, he had said to our chapter in May, he said, to those who say, we have to run government like a business, businesses, he said, exclude, businesses extract. Solidarity is what will get us through it, though, as David has said. And he also said, he's like, efficient means you're going to spend less on something, so you better tell us what you're going to be more efficient about, because we might not like it. So anyway, I thought there was some really, if no one was here in May, I would rewatch that one. That was good. Anyway, so yeah, Dennis Kucinich, May or January next year.
Okay, now give us his cell number so we can all call him.
He actually, yeah, so I do have his private cell. And when he called me, he goes, yeah, you text me on this. He said, do not give my phone number out. So he actually addressed that. He said, do not give my number out. So he was ahead of you, David.
Okay, Bill, I guess we got a couple more minutes here. Does anybody who hasn't said anything want to put your hand up?
Yesterday, there was an extraordinary webinar that was organized in part by the New York crowd that had to do with the role of indigenous people in healthcare. And there was a Native American woman there that talked about what it meant to be a woman, Native American woman in that culture. And the more she talked, the more my stomach was just tied in a knot. I mean, the barbarousness and the violence of our system is so profound that somehow or another, we just don't carry the gravity and the urgency of the need for our success. And we can't assume that this is going to take years. We've got to do it faster than years, somehow or another. I beg you to look at ourhealth.pub. That policy model was built over a year with 40 confreres from all around the country. And the person who drafted it was the author of 676. His name is Joel Siegel, and I hired him from North Carolina to work with me and the 40 other people that were involved in the program. The challenge of that is to think imaginatively, freshly, with what a universal healthcare system needs to have and what we need to go to the general public with that would be truly inspiring. We have to say specifically, we're going to return back to home and street-based care. We have to democratize governance. We have to decentralize the empires. We have to radically transform and retrain the workforce. We're not talking about any of that stuff with our single-payer model. Our single-payer model is stodgy. It's been around for 30 years. We started off with Ron Dellum's socialized medicine legislation back in the old days, back in the 60s and 70s, when he was repeatedly putting it up there. And we've taken a step back with single payer. We have to be able to move in a way that red baiting is not going to terrify us or slow us down. And those are just some of the things that I just wanted to suggest to you. I've written a book called Public Hostage, Public Ransom, Ending Institutional America. And it's a story of how I organized the federal class action lawsuit for crimes against humanity against the governor in the state of New York for administering a mental retardation concentration camp called Willowbrook State School in the 70s. But the arc of the narrative comes all the way to the present system. There's a website, publichostagepublicransom.org. That book essentially is a spear in the chest of Medicaid. Medicaid is utterly evil. And if we don't have to overcome Medicaid in developing a universal healthcare system, it's a step in our direction. So the Wyoming situation may not be altogether bad if we move powerfully in order to bring this moral fire back into the that's the book. That's right. So the point of that book has to do with arguing the need for universal health care and to look at how all of us as we age are going to wind up in an institutional terminus because Medicaid has spent $6 trillion since 1965 to institutionalize our society. And people don't even know what it's like to have a family intact in large part and can't afford to manage a dependent member of the family. So anyway, there's just a bunch of things I just want to throw out on the table. The thrust of our health is to stoke the imagination of the conversation that we have to have going forward in order to drive our strategy, to drive our moral, righteous agenda, our socialist agenda, our class conscious agenda, because that's what it's going to be. There will be a class conscious transformation of the culture if we have a healthcare system in the future.
Okay. I think we've had a really wonderful meeting tonight. Thanks to everybody participating. And
thank you, David.
Hopefully I'll be able to put this on YouTube in a couple of days. First thing I got to do is follow the direction from David Loud and fill out some form tonight before midnight. All right. So
just one closing remark. I want to hand it to everybody for agreeing to put up the money to send the students. And the national organization really made an effort too. There were what, 40, almost 40% of the room were students, and it truly energized the meeting. So thanks to all of you for agreeing to support our two students who went. I think, Scotty, you and John definitely made an impact and with your colleagues, and I want to just congratulate you and thank you for coming.
Again, thank you, Scotty. Check will be in the mail tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I had a fantastic time. It was really great to be around like-minded people. It really gets the blood flowing and excitement there again.
Good. And welcome to the profession, and keep up the hard work.
All right.
All right. Thanks, David.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, end.
Oh,
Good night.
good night.